Imagine a small boy flying across a wooden stage like a rag doll, landing with a thud, rolling, standing up without a tear, and calmly walking back for the next throw. The audience gasps, then explodes with laughter. In the middle of that storm of noise, the boy's face stays perfectly calm, like stone. That boy would grow up to be Buster Keaton, one of the greatest silent film comedians and stunt performers who ever lived, a man whose whole life seemed to be spent defying gravity, danger, and failure with the same quiet, stubborn expression. Buster Keaton was born Joseph Frank Keaton on October 4, 1895, in a tiny town in Kansas. His parents were traveling vaudeville performers, constantly on the road, so he liked to say he was born on tour and never really stopped touring. His father, Joe Keaton, was a loud, energetic comedian who also sold patent medicine from the stage. His mother, Myra, played the saxophone and joined in on the comedy routines. For them, the theater was not just a workplace, it was their home, their office, and their entire universe. Buster's childhood did not include normal things like schoolyards, neighbors, and playgrounds. His playground was backstage, in the wings, and under the hot glare of stage lights. His famous nickname, Buster, came from a fall. According to the story he told for the rest of his life, he tumbled down a long flight of stairs when he was about 18 months old. Instead of screaming or crying, he simply got up again. A magician who was traveling with the family, often said to be Harry Houdini, watched the fall and commented, "That was a real Buster." In vaudeville slang, that meant a serious wipeout, a hard fall. The word stuck to the child so quickly that even his parents stopped calling him Joseph. From then on, he was simply Buster, the toddler who could fall like a professional stuntman and walk away as if nothing had happened. By the time he was 3 or 4 years old, Buster was part of his parents' act, known as the Three Keatons. Their routine was rough, loud, and physical. His father played an angry drunk who constantly picked fights with the small boy on stage. He would grab Buster by the collar, by the seat of his pants, or by hidden handles sewn into the child's costume, and throw him across the stage. The boy would hit the floor, slide, crash into scenery, or bounce off a prop, and the audience would scream with laughter and shock. Buster learned, very early, how to protect himself. How to tuck his chin, how to roll with the impact, how to land on shoulders and hips instead of on his head or spine. These skills, learned in childhood, became the foundation for the legendary stunts he later performed on film. The act looked so violent that sometimes authorities tried to shut it down. There were stories of child protection officers coming backstage, threatening to arrest the parents for abuse. But Buster always insisted that he was not hurt and that he enjoyed the work. He even joked that he got into more trouble offstage than onstage, because at least onstage his father always knew where he would land. Whether that was entirely true or not, it shows how deeply he identified with physical comedy. For him, falling was not humiliation, it was an art and a weapon. A good fall could win the audience's heart faster than any clever line of dialogue. Another early discovery changed his life just as deeply as learning how to fall. He learned the power of a straight face. As a child he experimented every night in front of a live audience. When he smiled or exaggerated his reactions, people laughed a little. When he kept his face completely blank while crazy things happened to him, they roared with laughter. The more serious he looked, the funnier the situation became. By the time he was a teenager, he had already formed the core of his screen personality. A calm, unshakable figure in the middle of chaos. Later, film fans would call him the Great Stone Face, because in his movies, even when buildings collapsed or trains crashed, his expression barely moved. Life on the vaudeville circuit was hard and restless. The Keatons traveled constantly from town to town, sometimes performing 3 or 4 shows a day. Buster learned not only how to perform but also how to read an audience. He noticed when people were getting restless, when a gag went on too long, and when a pause could create suspense. He also picked up technical skills. He watched how stagehands set lights, moved scenery, and handled props. In the summers, the family often spent time at an actors' colony in Michigan, where performers from all over the circuit met to rest and experiment with new material. For most children, summer meant lakes and forests. For Buster, it meant watching comedians rewrite routines, sharpen their timing, and test ideas that might become the next season's hit. As he grew older, however, the family act began to crack. His father's drinking became worse, and the rough humor on stage started to spill into real life backstage. Buster, now a young man, had outgrown the role of the small, throwable child, and he was looking for new paths. He had spent nearly his entire life on the boards, and he knew the rhythms of vaudeville by heart. But there was something new and strange on the horizon. Motion pictures. At first, many stage actors looked down on movies. They thought film was cheap, mechanical, and temporary. It paid well, but it did not have the glamour or tradition of live theater. For Buster, though, the camera was a puzzle and a challenge, and he loved puzzles. In 1917, when he was in his early 20s, he visited a film studio in New York where the popular comedian Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle was shooting a two-reel comedy. Buster was curious but not especially impressed, until he stepped in front of the camera. Arbuckle invited him to join a scene and handed him a prop. Buster improvised a few bits of business, using his vaudeville instincts and physical skills, and the crew laughed so hard that he realized something important. The camera loved him. The very next day, he tore apart a movie camera, piece by piece, just to understand how it worked. Then he put it back together and started thinking not only as an actor but also as a filmmaker. He wanted to know why a gag looked different from one angle than from another, how cutting from wide shots to close-ups changed the rhythm of a joke, and how editing could turn a simple trip or fall into a chain reaction of comedy. Over the next few years, Buster appeared in a series of short films with Arbuckle. These early shorts were wild, chaotic, and often a bit crude, but they gave him priceless training. He learned how to plan gags specifically for the camera, not just for a live audience in a theater. He discovered that film allowed him to do things he could never do on stage. Repeat a stunt until it was perfect, experiment with strange camera angles, and combine separate shots into a single seamless illusion. At the same time, he brought something new to film comedy. A high level of precision. If a stunt was mistimed by half a second, it might look fake, or worse, it might seriously injure someone. Buster treated every gag like a mathematical problem. Where should he stand? How fast should a car move? When should a wall start falling? Everything had to be calculated, and he loved the challenge. By 1920, he was ready for his own series. He began making two-reel comedies under his own name, Buster Keaton, and quickly developed a recognizable style. In these shorts, he was usually a small, determined man facing a big, indifferent world. The plots often started with a simple situation. A marriage, a job, a misunderstanding. Then, step by step, that small situation would spiral into a huge chain of disasters. In 1 week, for example, he and his new bride try to assemble a prefabricated house, but the pieces have been maliciously renumbered. As they build it, doors end up on the roof, windows float in the air, and the entire house spins in the wind like a crazy carnival ride. The idea is simple, but the execution is incredibly detailed. Every plank, every nail, every wobble is carefully planned to produce maximum surprise and laughter. Another classic short, Cops, shows Buster accidentally offending almost the entire police force of a city. What begins with a few officers chasing him gradually turns into a massive parade of policemen all racing after one small man. The more he tries to escape, the worse the situation gets. This kind of escalation became a hallmark of his comedy. He loved to ask, what happens next? What is the logical next disaster? Then he would keep pushing until the world seemed ready to collapse. Yet in the center of it all stood his quiet figure, running, jumping, falling, but never losing his dignity completely, even when he tripped over a bucket or crashed into a horse-drawn wagon. Once he had mastered shorts, Buster moved into feature-length films. The mid-1920s became his golden age, a period when he created some of the most admired silent comedies in history. Each feature was built around a strong visual idea, a historical setting, or a technical experiment. In Our Hospitality, he played a young man caught in the middle of an old family feud in the 1830s. The film combined carefully researched period detail with outrageous gags, including a breathtaking sequence on a waterfall. In The Navigator, he played a rich but helpless young man stranded on a deserted ocean liner, turning the huge empty ship into a playground of jokes and mechanical surprises. Perhaps his most magical film from this period is Sherlock Jr. In it, he plays a shy movie projectionist who dreams of becoming a great detective. After being falsely accused of a crime, he falls asleep in the projection booth and dreams that he steps into the screen. In his dream, the world of the film comes alive around him, and he becomes the brilliant detective he always wanted to be. The sequence in which his dream self walks into the movie is still astonishing. The background suddenly changes from a garden to a cliff to the ocean to a busy city street, while Buster stays in exactly the same position in the center of the frame, reacting helplessly as the world changes around him. To create this illusion, he had to measure every movement precisely. If he had stepped a few inches in the wrong direction during filming, the cut to the next scene would have looked wrong, and the magic would be broken. If Sherlock Jr. shows Keaton as a dreamer and magician of the screen, the general shows him as an engineer of epic action. Set during the American Civil War, it tells the story of a Southern train engineer whose beloved locomotive, the General, is stolen by enemy spies. Keaton's character chases the thieves across enemy territory, mostly alone, using trains and tracks as both obstacles and weapons. What makes the film extraordinary is its scale. Instead of using models or miniatures, Buster insisted on real locomotives, real tracks, and real bridges. In the film's most famous moment, a train plunges through a burning bridge and crashes into a river. This was not a special effect. He actually ordered a full-size locomotive to be wrecked for the shot. It was one of the most expensive single stunts ever filmed at the time. The movie did not make a huge profit when it was first released, but later generations recognized it as one of his finest achievements, combining comedy, romance, and large-scale action in a way few films have ever matched. Another legendary stunt came in Steamboat Bill, Jr., a film about the son of a stern riverboat captain. In one scene, a violent storm tears through a town, and entire buildings collapse around Buster's character. He stands in front of a house, exhausted and unaware, when the entire front wall of the two-story building breaks loose and falls forward toward him. There is a single window on the second floor. As the wall falls, Buster is standing in exactly the right spot so that the open window frame passes around his body, leaving him untouched. It is a single shot, filmed with a real wall and real wood. If he had miscalculated his position by just a few centimeters, the heavy frame would have struck his head and possibly killed him. The crew was so worried that some of them refused to watch. Buster simply took his mark, folded his hands, and waited for the director to call action. Not all of his stunts ended so perfectly. During the filming of Sherlock Jr., he performed a stunt where he clung to the spout of a water tank on a moving train. The water suddenly poured out, slamming him onto the railroad tracks. He was in serious pain afterward but continued working. Years later, an X-ray revealed that he had actually fractured a vertebra in his neck during that stunt and had unknowingly worked through a broken neck. That combination of toughness and devotion to his craft is both impressive and frightening. Keaton's body became a kind of battlefield on which he was willing to risk injury over and over again in the service of a perfect joke. While his screen life was full of triumphs, his personal life was more unstable. In 1921 he married Natalie Talmadge, an actress from a famous Hollywood family. They had 2 sons, and for a while, Buster enjoyed the image of a successful star with a beautiful wife and a fashionable home. But the marriage soon became strained. His workload was enormous, the pressure to keep making hits was constant, and he began drinking more heavily. Natalie had her own ambitions and anxieties, and eventually the marriage collapsed. They separated, and she took the children and even changed their surnames so that they no longer legally carried their father's name. For a man whose identity and pride were so closely tied to his work and family, this was a deep emotional wound, one that he rarely spoke about in public but that clearly affected him. At the same time, Keaton made a professional decision that he later called the worst mistake of his career. In 1928 he signed a contract with a major studio, MGM. Up to that point, he had enjoyed an unusual level of freedom. On his own productions he could write, direct, act, and edit according to his vision. At MGM, the system was much more controlled. Scripts were written by assigned writers, directors were chosen by the studio, and budgets were tightly supervised. Keaton suddenly found himself as merely an actor on his own films, with limited influence on the story or the gags. The studio wanted to protect their investment by following formulas that had worked before, but these formulas did not always fit his unique style of visual comedy. The arrival of sound films made the situation even more complicated. Keaton's comedy was built on movement, timing, and visual invention. He could speak clearly and had a pleasant voice, but he was not a verbal comedian in the way that some others were. MGM often gave him scripts that depended on dialogue-heavy scenes and simple jokes, wasting his talent for intricate physical routines. Some of his early talking films did well at the box office, but he felt increasingly trapped and unhappy. His personal drinking problem worsened, and with his divorce and financial troubles, his life began spiraling out of control. By the early 1930s, the studio dismissed him, and he went through a period of severe alcoholism and even a brief stay in a sanitarium. For a while, it looked as though Buster Keaton might become just another tragic story of a silent film star destroyed by the coming of sound. But he was tougher than that. Slowly, he rebuilt his life. He found work again, sometimes in low-budget films, sometimes as an uncredited gag writer behind the scenes. He created routines for other comedians and appeared in modest supporting roles. He even worked in Europe for a time, making films abroad where his name still had a certain power. Throughout these years, he never completely left the industry. Even when he was no longer a star, he remained a working professional, always ready with a new idea for a stunt or a gag. A key turning point in his personal life came when he met a young dancer named Eleanor Norris. They married in 1940, and she became his third wife and his most important ally. Eleanor was practical, calm, and deeply devoted to him. She helped him control his drinking, manage his money, and navigate the changing landscape of show business. Unlike some people around him in the past, she believed in his talent not only as a memory of a golden age but as a living, working artist. Friends would later say that she saved his life, not just physically but emotionally. With her by his side, he found a new kind of balance and peace. During the 1940s and 1950s, Keaton often worked in television, a new medium that surprisingly suited his style. TV shows needed short, strong visual gags that could grab attention quickly, and Buster was a master of that form. He appeared on variety shows, starred in commercials, and even had his own short-lived TV series. Young audiences who had never seen a silent film suddenly discovered a small, serious-faced man doing impossible things with ladders, doors, bicycles, and furniture. He also appeared in a number of feature films in small or medium-sized roles, sometimes as a nostalgic nod to the silent era, sometimes simply because directors recognized that he could still deliver a brilliant moment of physical comedy. In these later years, something unexpected and wonderful happened. Critics and film lovers rediscovered his silent work. Old prints of his 1920s films were dug out of archives and private collections, cleaned up, and shown at film festivals and retrospectives. Writers who had grown up on sound films watched The General, Sherlock Jr., and Steamboat Bill, Jr., and were astonished by their energy and originality. Articles appeared praising Keaton's perfect timing, his inventive use of space, and his willingness to risk his body for a gag. Slowly, his reputation rose from forgotten silent clown to great film artist. He was invited to festivals in Europe and America, where audiences cheered for him as he appeared on stage, now older and smaller, but still carrying that unmistakable calm dignity. Even in his 60s, Buster continued to work. One of his last film roles was in a musical comedy set in ancient Rome, where he played an old, shaky character who still manages to pull off clever bits of business. Watching him there, you can see the years in his face and posture, but you can also still catch flashes of the old brilliance. The perfectly timed double take, the controlled fall, the tiny gesture that turns a simple moment into a joke. Behind the scenes, he was coping with serious health problems, including lung cancer, likely caused by decades of heavy smoking. He died on February 1, 1966, at the age of 70, leaving behind a body of work that future generations are still exploring and enjoying. What makes Buster Keaton's legacy so powerful is not just his bravery or his technical skill, but the emotional tone of his comedy. Unlike some clowns who beg the audience for affection, he rarely tried to be cute or sentimental. His screen characters were often ordinary men. Projectionists, mechanics, students, sailors, struggling young husbands. They were not superheroes, they were people who made mistakes, misread situations, and got caught in disasters that were partly their own fault and partly just bad luck. Yet they never completely gave up. No matter how many times life knocked them down, literally or figuratively, they got up again, brushed off the dust, and tried once more. His style of filmmaking also continues to influence directors, stunt performers, and comedians. He preferred wide shots that allowed the audience to see his whole body and the entire environment. This made the stunts feel real and honest, because viewers could see that it was truly him doing these things, not a double or a camera trick. He built jokes out of space and movement. A door that opens onto a sudden drop, a car that moves by itself, a train that keeps rolling when nobody is looking. He showed that a camera does not just record action, it can also become part of the joke, part of the storytelling. Many modern filmmakers who love physical comedy, from action stars to directors of visual comedies, have studied his films shot by shot to learn how he constructed his sequences. Another fascinating element of his work is his relationship to machines. Trains, boats, cars, cameras, and even entire buildings behave almost like characters in his films. They break down, rebel, and surprise him, but they also sometimes save him. A runaway locomotive can be both a deadly threat and a partner in a grand chase. A camera can both expose him and turn him into a hero. This complicated dance between man and machine gives his films a strangely modern feeling, even though they were made a century ago. They reflect the anxiety and excitement of an era in which technology was rapidly changing everyday life. In the end, the story of Buster Keaton is the story of a man who turned hardship into art. He grew up being thrown across stages, learned to land without breaking, and carried that skill into a new medium where the whole world could watch him survive disaster after disaster. He rose to the top of his field, lost almost everything through a combination of personal problems and studio politics, then quietly rebuilt a career and lived long enough to see people rediscover and celebrate his genius. He did all of this with the same calm, thoughtful face that audiences loved from the beginning. Behind that stone face was a sensitive, inventive mind that never stopped looking for new ways to make people laugh. Today, when a viewer sits down to watch one of his silent films, they might expect something dusty and old-fashioned. Instead, they find themselves laughing out loud at gags that are as sharp and surprising as if they were invented yesterday. A house falls, a train crashes, a boat sinks, a dream becomes reality, and through it all, a small man with a flat hat and sad eyes keeps moving, keeps trying, keeps inventing. That is the enduring power of Buster Keaton. A life and a body of work that prove that true creativity can outlast fashion, technology, and even the limitations of its own time.